Every morning begins with a choice. Most people never realize they're making it. Before their feet touch the floor, before they say a single word, before the sun has fully risen, their mind has already decided what kind of day they're going to have. Not because of what happened, but because of what they looked for. This is the story of a man who wasn't depressed, wasn't poor, wasn't sick, yet somehow felt exhausted by life every single morning. What changed him wasn't a new job, a vacation, or a miracle. It was 5 quiet minutes that almost anyone could try. Ethan had what most people would call a stable life, a steady career, a comfortable apartment, friends who cared about him, a woman named Emma who loved him deeply. Nothing seemed terribly wrong, yet everything felt strangely heavy. Every morning started exactly the same. The alarm rang. He sighed before opening his eyes. His hand searched for his phone almost automatically. Within minutes, he had already seen arguments online, bad news, people showing perfect vacations, successful entrepreneurs, perfect families, perfect bodies, perfect lives. By the time he stood up, his own life already felt smaller. He hadn't even brushed his teeth, and his brain was already collecting reasons to feel behind. Something curious began happening. His brain became incredibly efficient at finding problems. If traffic was slow, that ruined his mood. If someone didn't smile, he assumed they were upset. If one email brought criticism, he completely ignored the 10 that praised his work. His attention acted like a magnet, not for happiness, for mistakes, for threats, for disappointments. The strange part, he never chose this consciously. His mind had simply practiced it, thousands of mornings in a row. What we repeat eventually becomes automatic. One evening, Emma looked at him for a long time before speaking. "I miss the man who used to laugh." The sentence wasn't loud, but it landed like thunder. She wasn't angry. She wasn't blaming him. She was simply tired. Tired of trying to pull you into the light when you've already decided the day is dark. That night, Ethan barely slept. For the first time, he wondered if the problem wasn't the world. Maybe it was where his attention had been living. The next morning, instead of grabbing his phone, he walked outside. No destination, just silence. Near a neighborhood garden, an elderly man was carefully watering tiny flowers. He smiled at Ethan. "You look like someone carrying invisible bricks." Ethan laughed. "I guess I am." The old man pointed toward 2 garden beds. One was overflowing with flowers, the other covered in weeds. They received the same sunlight, the same rain, the same soil. So why do they look different? Ethan shrugged. The old man smiled. Because one is cared for every day. The other is left to grow on its own. Then he looked directly at Ethan. "Your mind works exactly the same way." The old man knelt beside the flower bed and gently pulled a small weed from the soil. He didn't rush. He didn't complain that weeds existed. He simply removed them, one at a time. Then he held the tiny weed in his hand. People think happiness arrives when life finally becomes easy. He smiled. But gardens teach us something different. If you never plant flowers, nature will happily grow weeds for you. He brushed the dirt from his hands before continuing. Your mind behaves the same way. If you don't intentionally choose what deserves your attention, fear will choose. Comparison will choose. Anger will choose. Bad news will choose. They never ask for permission. They simply grow. Ethan stood silently. For years, he had blamed traffic, his workload, the economy, other people, even bad luck. But he had never asked a simpler question. What had he been feeding every morning? The old man opened a small notebook. Its pages were filled with short sentences. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary. One page read, "The the smell of fresh coffee before sunrise. Another simply said, "A stranger held the door for me today." One entry was only 6 words. The wind felt cool after the rain. Ethan frowned. "That's it?" The old man laughed. "Exactly. We keep waiting for life-changing moments, but life is mostly made of ordinary ones." Then he handed Ethan a blank notebook. "I have a challenge for you. 30 mornings, 5 minutes, before touching your phone, before checking emails, before thinking about work. Write down 3 real moments from yesterday that made life just a little better. Not big achievements, not fake optimism. Just moments, real ones, specific ones." The old man looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "You aren't writing to remember the past. You're training your brain to notice the present." The first morning felt ridiculous. He stared at the empty page. Nothing seemed important enough. 5 minutes passed. Finally, the shower was warm. Dinner tasted better than I expected. I slept 6 straight hours. That was all. The next morning wasn't much easier. His entries felt small, almost embarrassing. The elevator arrived quickly. The cashier smiled. The clouds looked interesting. Part of him wanted to quit. Another part, this isn't changing anything. And perhaps it wasn't. Not yet. Because habits rarely announce themselves while they're forming. Like roots beneath the ground, the first changes are invisible. About a week later, something unusual happened. During an exhausting meeting, Ethan noticed sunlight reflecting across the conference room wall. For a few seconds, the entire room glowed golden. No one else seemed to notice. Normally, he wouldn't have either. Then a strange thought crossed his mind. I should remember this tomorrow. He paused. Why had he thought that? Then he realized. Without even trying, his brain had begun searching for tomorrow's 3 moments. Not because someone reminded him, because it had been practicing. For the first time in years, his attention wasn't automatically chasing problems. It had quietly begun collecting beauty. The changes were almost impossible to measure, until other people noticed. Emma watched him one evening while they cooked dinner together. "You seem lighter." He looked surprised. "I do?" "You smile more. You don't rush through conversations anymore. You actually notice things." She was right. Nothing outside had changed. Work was still stressful. Bills still arrived. Traffic still existed. The world hadn't become kinder, but his attention had. And wherever attention goes, experience quietly follows. The garden inside his mind was beginning to bloom. By the second week, the notebook no longer felt like homework. It became something Ethan quietly looked forward to. His entries began to change. Instead of writing, "The coffee tasted good," he found himself writing, "The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen before anyone else woke up." Instead of, "Nice weather," he wrote, "The breeze carried the scent of jasmine as I walked to work." The difference wasn't the words. The difference was his attention. He wasn't inventing happiness. He was slowing down long enough to notice it. And the more carefully he observed life, the more life seemed to offer. It was as though someone had adjusted the focus on a camera. The world had always contained beauty. He simply hadn't been looking in the right direction. Then, life reminded him of something important. Gratitude doesn't prevent difficult days. One Tuesday afternoon, a major project failed. Deadlines were pushed back. Clients complained. The office filled with frustration. A month earlier, Ethan would have carried that stress home. He would have replayed every mistake. He would have convinced himself the entire week was ruined. But something unexpected happened. That evening, after dinner, he opened his notebook. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to leave the page blank. Then he remembered the old gardener's words. A garden isn't beautiful because weeds never appear. It's beautiful because someone keeps choosing what to grow. So he wrote, "A coworker stayed late to help me without being asked. Emma hugged me before I left for work. The sunset on the drive home reminded me that difficult days still end." The problems hadn't disappeared, But they were no longer the only story his mind was telling. 30 mornings passed. The notebook was no longer empty. Its pages held dozens of ordinary moments that, together, had become something extraordinary. Ethan returned to the little garden where everything had begun. The old gardener looked up, smiled, and said, "You look different." Ethan laughed. "I was about to say the same thing to you." The old man chuckled. "I haven't changed." "No," Ethan replied, "but I have." They sat together on a wooden bench as the morning sun warmed the grass. After a long silence, Ethan asked, "When does this become permanent?" The old man looked toward the flowers before answering. "It doesn't. You don't water a garden once and expect it to bloom forever. You care for it again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. Happiness works the same way. It isn't a destination you reach, it's a direction you choose, again and again. Maybe you're waiting for life to improve before you allow yourself to feel grateful. A better job, more money, less stress, a different house, more time. But what if gratitude isn't the reward that comes after a better life? What if it's one of the habits that helps create one? Your brain is always learning what matters. Every complaint teaches it to search for another complaint. Every moment of appreciation teaches it to notice another reason to appreciate. Neither habit forms overnight. Both are built one day at a time. The question isn't whether your mind is being trained. It already is. The real question is, who is doing the training? Tomorrow morning, before you check your phone, before the world tells you what deserves your attention, take 5 quiet minutes. Write down 3 real moments from yesterday. Not the biggest, not the most impressive, just 3 moments that reminded you life wasn't entirely ordinary. Do it for 30 days. Not because it will solve every problem, but because it may quietly change the way you see them. And sometimes, changing the way you see your life is the first step toward changing the life you live. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment with one small thing you're grateful for today. It doesn't have to be extraordinary. Sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that matter most. And if you'd like more stories that help you slow down, think deeply, and build a more meaningful life, don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, take care of your mind, the same way you'd care for a garden. Because whatever you choose to grow today is what you'll be living among tomorrow.